You use your truck every single day. You drive in the shop in the morning. You pick up materials, run to a job site, grab some lunch. You drive home at night. Most days, nothing happens. But here's the question. If you get into an accident on your way to a job site with your tools in the bed of your truck and your company name on the door, do you actually know which insurance policy is going to be there to defend you? Is it your personal auto policy or a commercial auto policy? And if you guess wrong, or worse, if you never thought about it, you could be looking at a claim denial right when you need coverage the most. That's what we're going to walk through today because this is one of the most common gaps we see, and it's one of the easiest to fix once you understand how it works. My name is Jim Eddington, and my agency helps individuals and businesses in Arizona, California, Nevada, and Utah navigate these kinds of situations every single day. So let's start with how most people end up in this gray area in the first place, because it's not complicated and it's not because anybody did anything wrong. You start a business, maybe you're a general contractor, maybe you're a mobile detailer, maybe you do HVAC or landscaping, or you're a handyman. You already own a truck or a van, and you've already got personal auto insurance on it. And when the business is just getting going, that vehicle does double duty. You drive it to the grocery store on Saturday, and you drive it to a job on Monday. It's the same truck, same keys, same you behind the wheel. So it feels like the same insurance should cover both, and a lot of people just never revisit that assumption. The problem is that your personal auto policy was rated and priced based on personal use. The insurance company looked at how many miles you drive, where you live, what you use the vehicle for, and they said, okay, based on this profile, here's your rate. What they didn't factor in is that you're now hauling significant equipment and materials to job sites 5 days a week, parking on active construction properties, and driving routes and distances that look nothing like a personal commute. That's a fundamentally different risk profile. And when the use of the vehicle changes, the coverage assumptions change with it. Now, most of the time, this doesn't matter. You drive to work, you drive home, nothing happens. That's the reality for the vast majority of days. But the moment something does happen, you rear end somebody on the way to your job, or someone rear ends you while your truck is parked at a client's property, the insurance company is going to look at the circumstances of the accident. And if those circumstances make it clear that you were engaged in business activity at the time, your personal auto insurer has grounds to deny that claim. They're not doing it to be difficult. They're doing it because they never agreed to cover commercial use. It wasn't in the contract. You are paying a personal rate for personal coverage, and the loss occurred during business operations. And when a claim gets denied, you're not just out the cost of the repair. If you caused the accident, you're personally responsible for the other party's medical bills, their vehicle damage, their lost wages. That can be tens of thousands of dollars before an attorney even gets involved. And if it goes to litigation, which it can when injuries are significant, you're funding your own legal defense on top of everything else. That's the real exposure here. It's not just a deductible or a repair bill. It's the full liability landing on you personally because no policy is in effect for what happened. So, what does a commercial auto policy actually do differently? It's built for this. It accounts for the fact that the vehicle is being used in the course of business. It's rated for the type of work you do, the distances you drive, what you're hauling, and who else might be driving the vehicle for your company. It covers liability if you cause an accident while working. It covers physical damage to your vehicle. And importantly, it covers you in a way that your personal auto policy explicitly doesn't when business use is involved. The cost difference between personal and commercial auto is real, and I'm not going to pretend it's not. Commercial auto premiums are higher. Depending on your industry, your driving record, the vehicles, and where you operate, it could be a meaningful difference. But the cost reflects the actual risk. You may be driving more miles in more varied conditions, often carrying equipment or materials that change the weight and handling of the vehicle. And you're exposed to liability in situations that a personal policy simply won't touch. So yes, it costs more. And the reason it costs more is because it's actually covering what you're doing. If you're a one-person operation, a sole proprietor, or a single member LLC, and you've got one truck that you use for everything, the fix is usually straightforward. You move that vehicle onto a commercial auto policy, or in some cases, you can add a business use endorsement to your personal policy, depending on the carrier and the type of work. Either way, you're making sure the insurer knows the vehicle is being used for business, and they've agreed to cover it on that basis. That's the key. They have to know, and they have to agree. But once your business grows, say you hire a couple of guys, maybe you've got 2 or 3 trucks now, the situation gets more complex in a few ways. First, you've got other people driving your vehicles, and those drivers have their own records, their own experience levels, and their own risk profiles. Your commercial auto policy needs to account for every driver. If someone on your crew gets into an accident in a company vehicle and they weren't disclosed, listed, or properly classified, you've got a coverage problem. Second, when you have a fleet, even a small one, you're dealing with things like hired and non-owned auto liability, which covers situations where an employee uses their own vehicle or a rental for business purposes. That's a gap that a lot of growing companies miss entirely because they're focused on the trucks they own, and they forget that the guy they just hired is running to the supply house in his personal car on company time. There's also a practical side to this that goes beyond the insurance. If you're bidding on commercial jobs, especially anything involving general contractors or government work, you're going to be asked to provide a certificate of insurance that shows commercial auto coverage. A personal auto policy won't satisfy that requirement. So beyond the claims exposure, there is a business operations issue. You might not even be able to win certain work without the right policy in place. That's not a scare tactic, it's just how the bidding process works in a lot of industries. One thing I want to be clear about is that this isn't an all or nothing situation. The solution depends on how you actually use your vehicles. If you're a real estate agent who drives a personal car to show houses, your exposure is different from a plumber who's got a fully loaded work van. Some carriers offer endorsements for light business use that can be added to a personal policy at a much lower cost than a full commercial auto policy. The key is that your insurance company knows what you're doing with the vehicles and has specifically agreed to cover that use. That's the conversation that matters, not whether you have the most expensive policy, but whether the policy you actually have matches the way you operate day to day. Not whether you have the most expensive policy, but whether the policy you have actually matches the way you operate day to day. And it's worth mentioning what happens when someone has both a personal auto policy and a commercial auto policy, because that's the setup a lot of business owners end up with. You might keep your personal auto for your spouse's car and your weekend driving, and you've got your commercial auto for the work trucks. That's fine. That's actually how it's supposed to work. The important thing is that the lines are clear. The vehicles used for business are on the commercial policy. The vehicles used for personal purposes are on the personal policy. Where people get into trouble is when a vehicle that's supposed to be on the commercial side is still sitting on the personal policy because nobody made the switch. Or when a new vehicle gets added to the business but only gets insured on the personal side because that's where the owner's other cars are and it was just easier at the time. That kind of thing happens more often than you'd think, and it's usually not intentional. You're busy running a business, you buy a new truck, you call your personal auto carrier because that's who you've always dealt with, and you add it on. 6 months later, you're using that truck on job sites every day and nobody's had a conversation about whether the coverage actually fits. It's not negligence, it's just the kind of thing that falls through the cracks when you've got 100 other things to deal with. So here's where you should be right now after hearing all of this. If you're a business owner and you're using any vehicle, yours, your employees, a rental, anything, in the course of doing business, You need to know exactly what policy is covering that vehicle and whether that policy was written with business use in mind. If you're a sole proprietor with one truck, the conversation is simple. Talk to your agent, make sure they know how you're using it, and make sure the policy reflects that. If you've got a crew and multiple vehicles, you need a commercial auto policy that lists every vehicle, every driver, and accounts for the possibility that someone on your team might use a personal or rented vehicle for work. And if you're growing and starting to bid on commercial jobs, get the commercial auto in place now because you're going to need the certificate anyway. The bottom line is this: the gap between personal auto and commercial auto isn't something that announces itself. It just sits there invisible until there's a claim. And when there is a claim, that's when you find out whether your coverage matches your reality. Getting it right is not complicated, and it doesn't have to be expensive relative to what you're protecting. It just requires an honest conversation about how your vehicles are actually being used. If you want help figuring out where you stand on this, whether you need to move a vehicle over to a commercial policy, or your current setup may have gaps, or whether you need to build out coverage for a growing fleet, that's exactly what we do. There's a link in the description. You can get a quote and we'll help you sort it out.